All right. Hi. My name is Mike Shannon. I'm a writer and lover. Undercover is cool. I'm a brother, son of mother, scholar, troublesome fool, amateur runner, former rugger, one to jump in the pool, and co-founder of a company discovered in school. But what I would typically introduce myself with is that latter title. What I want to talk about here is a little bit of why that can be problematic and why I think we could be and should be on the verge of the greatest unlocking of creative talent in and around the workplace. And so to do that, first I want to provide a little context with a story that I experienced. And so, as I said, so I am one of the co-founders of Packback. We awaken student curiosity, do a lot of really cool things with college lecture halls. And not too long ago, when we were still kind of scrapping our way together, we were incubated out of another company's office called Context Media, fastest growing company in Chicago. They had about 150 people at the time. We had about 15. And while I was at the office, I kind of got into this routine of hanging out and made a friend by the name of Ernesto. Ernesto was a product manager at Context Media. We were both always at the office late, and so we would end up talking about technology, business, you name it, and that was pretty much it. And this went on for weeks. And fortunately, my lovely girlfriend, Morgan, was also working there. And one day she said, you know, Mike, you've been hanging out with Ernesto a lot. I found out that he has this nickname, Beats, because he likes to make hip-hop beats, and you like to write, so maybe you guys should collaborate and work on something. Long story short, next thing I know, now, as I know, Beats and I are working on a few projects, and we thought it was the coolest thing. What are the chances that, you know, we both just happen to work out of here? And then we hit sort of this creative roadblock. We actually had a concept for a song that required a female vocalist. And I feel vulnerable with you guys. I'm going to admit I'm not one of those, and neither was Ernesto. And so, you know, he hit up their internal channels of Slack, explaining that a female singer was a talent we lack, and the back channels reacted and, in fact, handed him back a new friend, and at the back, we at last mastered the track. And so that new friend was our friend named Grace, who is a phenomenal singer. And we went and we finished the song. We were happy with it. And again, the thought was, well, what are the chances of that? And that was actually a pretty good question, because without Morgan basically giving the nod and making a connection there, we probably would have never sort of gotten to that level of conversation. And we thought, okay, well, this is pretty cool. But then as we started talking about it outwardly, the strange thing happened, right? We ended up having individuals coming up to us, and these are always sort of back channel conversations in the hallways, and you know, we'd have, say, a developer come up and say, you know, I'm a violinist, or a salesperson who also played piano, or an artist, you name it. And we realized all of a sudden that we were kind of surrounded in what I'll call latent creative talent. So we were surrounded in this kind of environment of latent creative talent. And while I thought this is, you know, pretty cool, it's probably not unique to just our two companies, right? But I do think it's particularly potent in the startup, high-growth company environment. And the reason for that is if you look at the DNA of the individual who ends up joining a startup, right? It's very congruent with the DNA of the artist. And so what is an artist doing, right? They're creating something from scratch. They're vulnerable to criticism and feedback. It's, in many cases, particularly music, say a very collaborative process, and it's a very iterative approach. And all of those factors hold true for creating a startup, right? Working in a high-paced environment. And so if that is true, if there's kind of this gravitational pull from creatives into this fast-paced world of startups, why is the word latent on here? I didn't really know. As we started thinking about it, came to this concept of primary public frame, right? So this is what I might most notably introduce myself as. It's probably what's on my LinkedIn page. It's basically the frame of reference that is most interesting without being risky, right? And so when you work at a startup or any, you know, fast-paced environment, any organization, this is actually really interesting, right? And so it's pretty awesome to introduce yourself by this primary public frame. It can be fascinating conversation, although over time what happens is the answers in the discussions become pretty surface level, right? Because you think about the complexities that go on in a given day, you know, they require kind of this level of granularity of understanding, and maybe you don't have time for that full conversation, or maybe There's information that can't be shared, or things aren't going so well, and you don't really want to share that with grandma. And so what ends up happening is you have these creative individuals, right? This individual who might be walking around stuck in this primary public frame, and by the 500th question, their mind is becoming tame because it's kind of become a game. They're designed as someone who's sane, and the thought of being stuck in that's binary, dumb, and lame, and so they're more prone to leave, right? Which is pretty risky. I mean, it's expensive to hire an employee. And when you're a creative, right? So let's say you're an artist, that's something that requires a lot of intrinsic passion. And when you're at a startup, there requires a lot of internal passion as well. And it can become this kind of all-consuming effort, right? It's very purpose-driven, but when you're spending that much time on it, it can kind of overshadow this additional creative passion, right? And so that's pretty dangerous when turnover rates are pretty high. But what if, as a painter, I could paint, or I could sing, or if I could rap and have a rapid track to manage half a path of hacker cats and khaki slacks with backward hats, which is what they're usually wearing, I might be more prone to stick around, right? And if I was more prone to stick around, I would be worth figuring out that I might like to rap, because we live in an environment where the millennial workforce today is going to have on average 4 jobs within their first decade of employment. Okay, it costs on the low end about $5,000 plus to actually go through the hiring and onboarding of a new employee. And so if you do the math, that's a lot of change being thrown at this game of musical or not so musical chairs. And so what can we do to actually combat that, to actually try to make up for it? Well, I think there's a couple things here. So if I take it back to our creative friends here, so fast forward a year and a half or so, and Packback moves into our own office, and we kept hanging out with our startup friends, and so from Packback, Jamber, Context Media, a bunch of us get together, and we end up creating this event, just a simple open mic, right? So the concept was, well, let's just have kind of an organic function where the individuals, at Packback, there's quite a few people that play music, have an audience to go and just, kind of express, any ideas that they're working on. Visual artists can put their work on display, and we've now done this 7 times, once a month. And it's organically grown, just word of mouth, and we had no idea what to expect, but the result has been pretty astonishing as word has kind of spread through this ecosystem. In the 7 events I've been at, I've witnessed one of the most, I'd say, sought-after, up-and-coming CEOs display her art in a very vulnerable scenario that really nobody knew she was actually working on. I've seen 2 new teammates come up and be exposed, share something very vulnerable, and that all of a sudden immediately create a connection with their teammates that wasn't otherwise there. I've seen countless examples of individuals who've had a very impressive primary public frame, right, come to open mic, express something, and then get back to us and say, wow, that was one of the most creative, liberating experiences. I feel so great now. I'm going to keep coming back. And as those, kind of items of feedback came to us, I realized, wow, what if every company or every organization was kind of aware of that? I think people would go nuts to try to figure out, well, how do we try to incite that at our organizations? And the parallel that I'll draw is fitness, right? And so, 50 years ago, not as many companies or organizations cared if you were in shape or not. But today, it's over 70% of companies have a wellness program, right? There's a calculated ROI on actually being in shape, right? And so that you're going to have a better employee base if they're actually, fit, feeling great. And so you want that fit employee, right? Because that's the individual who, in the moment of their pain, feeling alone within a lane, would rather take a breath to check composure than complain. The bridge to solace from insane, controlled emotions under strain is often just a splash of serotonin in the brain, because that's what's happening when we're actually exercising and we're fit. The brain is releasing this, I believe it's some flavor of Gatorade called serotonin, into the brain. And you actually are able, as an individual, to focus better. We're able to think critically, and ultimately, the benefits of fit that can elicit wit go on and on and on, and there's far more benefits to actually putting money into that, having programs. When I say that I think creativity is the next horizon for that, it's because there's actually far more ways to actually put the brain into hyperdrive. Certainly being fit is one, but I mean, the brain has this, for example, impeccable junction called the executive function that lets you do something exemptive disruption. And if you can do that, right, you can focus more, and the executive function is what we're using when we actually exhibit any of our creative habits or talents. And so if I could actually kind of try to incentivize individuals, find how to actually get a teammate to be, exercising their creativity, that would be pretty awesome. And so there's a lot of these studies out there that are now looking at how do we trigger usage of the executive function of the brain, right? And there's psychologists out there, and I have no idea what the answer is to that trigger, but what I would say is you don't necessarily have to look at some world-changing method of triggering it. If you have an exciting company or organization, I guarantee you have artists in your employee count, probably a lot of them, because we really don't see it. If you think about the percentage of artists that are actually mainstream, this is a recent study a few years ago that was done by Next Big Sound. Only 1% of the artists that we even know about are considered mainstream, right? So the individuals whose names you know, not because they're just killing it at the local karaoke, but across different towns they're known. Of total artists, 91% are considered totally undiscovered, right? Which means that this latent creative talent is absolutely discreet, passing you in the street, staring you in the eyes, slapping you in the feet, and you still walk right past it. And why wouldn't you, right? It's in a different frame. And so there's probably not some scalable solution, but if as individual organizations we can ask the question of, well, how do we figure out where the passions are, right? How can we, maybe at least have managers asking the question, I've got, an awesome engineer, but do they have, another passion? Is there another talent here, right? Because I think the impact when you get there is incredible. So for me, the other week, I wasn't going to do anything at our open mic. I was just being lazy. I just didn't have anything planned. A few of our teammates heard me saying that just casually. And for 3 of them, the reaction was, what? What do you mean? No, you're doing something. And I realized, okay, I actually had this very positive social pressure right there in the core, at the nest of my primary public frame. I was actually being expected to step out and kind of show, another lens, another frame. And so for me, the environment that I'm working in was not a roadblock or overshadowing something else. The creative side was actually very much dependent on it. In fact, it was actually a source of strength. And so, I think that can be done. I don't know what the answer is, but at least asking that question is certainly worthwhile, right? Because across the world, I do believe the creative call is whistling, its sacred vault is glistening. I just implore you, crack the door. Thank you all for listening.